All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Allison Scaber, Consolidated Planning Group. We are a special needs planning firm in the greater Houston area. I'm getting some feedback, so if everybody could mute their lines. Okay. I think that did it. Okay. So today we are really excited to bring Marilyn Gilbreath with the Texas Workforce Commissions today to talk about vocational rehab. Consolidated Planning Group is a special needs financial planning firm. We do holistic planning. And we work with special needs families developing a future care plan for our families. I'm just bear with me 1 second. We're getting a lot of feedback. I'm going to try to fix that. Okay. Okay, hopefully that is a little bit better. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I've got everybody muted now. Marilyn, you will need to unmute yourself. So as I said before, we've got Marilyn Gilbreath here with us today from the Texas Workforce Commission, and she's going to be talking to us about the vocational rehab services. This is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, and as it relates to work and our kids with special needs. And so, there's been a lot of talk in the past of issues with the Texas Workforce Commission, or I can't get a hold of my rep. The pandemic changed things. There's so many things. But we're excited about Marilyn and her role and what she brings to the table. And I think that you are going to be excited as well to learn about the options that are available for your child or children. So, having said that, Marilyn, I am going to just turn everything right on over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all? Again, my name is Marilyn Gilbreath, and I am the Community Outreach and Awareness Specialist. And there's one of me in every region. And we have been on board this week exactly 1 year. I've been with the agency 30 years this past December, but I've been in this position 1 year exactly this week, as have my counterparts. The reason that the Community Outreach and Awareness Specialist was created is because a lot of people have lost touch with us. So some of you all knew us as Texas Rehabilitation Commission, TRC. Some of you knew us as Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services. And then in 2017, we went under Texas Workforce Solutions, TWC, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, and a lot of people lost us. Okay. So I want to go through this PowerPoint today, but I really want to get to your questions. So we're going to go through the PowerPoint and get a real good understanding of what vocational rehabilitation services are. And then I'll be ready to answer any of your questions. If there's something that's just really urgent you need to ask, then Allison is monitoring the chat and she'll stop me and I'll answer that question. And trust me, it doesn't upset me to do that. I don't have a problem with that. So next slide, please.
And today's meeting is being recorded, and we will put out the meeting to everybody, with the recording, so you can go back and reference this later. So thank you.
Great. So the big question is, what is vocational rehabilitation? What are those services? So we help people with a disability. It can be mental, physical, or visual disability, obtain, retain, or advance in competitive integrated employment. And the key word there is CIE. It has to be competitive integrated employment. That's what vocational rehabilitation services does. We help people obtain, retain, or advance in competitive integrated employment. Next slide, please. So who do we serve? As I said a few minutes ago, anybody with a mental, physical, or visual disability, okay? And I'll let you kind of scroll through that because people get really confused. Well, do you serve this disability? Do you serve that disability? Who do you serve? We serve anybody with a physical, mental, or visual disability, okay? So it hits all those bullets. and probably some that there aren't on here. We could sit and talk all day about different disabilities, and I'd probably nod my head and say yes. Okay, next slide. Did you all get the next slide? Because it did advance for me. There we go. So then we talk about eligibility, okay? You may be eligible for services depending upon how your disability interferes with work. So let's talk about that. You saw all those different disabilities, okay? And then we talked about competitive integrated employment. So how do those two connect? I'm sure every single one of us on this webinar today knows somebody with a disability that is gainfully employed and is doing great. Okay, we all do. However, there are some people whose disability is an impediment to getting, keeping, or advancing in a job. And that's where vocational rehabilitation services comes in. So if your disability, whatever it may be, is causing a hindrance, and we call it an impediment to employment, then that's where we determine if you're eligible for services. Because I know somebody, a personal friend of mine, who is legally blind, does the same job that our counselors do every day and has for over 30 years. There's no impediment to employment. So your disability has to cause a problem for you getting and or keeping or advancing in employment. So that's how we determine eligibility. Next slide, please. So we have requirements for eligibility, okay? And the first one is that the customer has to have a physical, mental, or visual disability, and it's a substantial barrier, as I talked about earlier, to your employment. And I really want you to hear that, because we get a lot of people that get confused at that first little bump in the road. You can have a legitimate disability, but it's not an impediment to employment. Does that make sense? So it has to be, the first requirement is that physical, mental, or visual disability has to be a substantial barrier to your getting employed. Next slide. The second requirement for eligibility, the customer must require vocational rehabilitation services to prepare for employment. So what does that mean? You can have a disability, and the vocational rehabilitation services we have available to you, you don't need. Make sense? No, not at all. Because some people have a disability, it's an impediment to employment. However, they don't require VR services, or they don't want the VR services. Let me put it that way. If you don't want the VR services, that's the second requirement. You have to be able to benefit from that. So the third one is the customer will benefit from services as determined by their ability to advance in competitive integrated employment. So first requirement is have a disability. Second requirement is want the VR services. Third requirement is that you can benefit from our services. So what does that look like? Let's talk about a mental health disability. Somebody is newly diagnosed with schizophrenia, okay? And nobody in the immediate family has schizophrenia, and they're getting fired from their job time after time after time, and it's always the employer's fault, always the employer's fault. And they come to VR services and say, hey, I don't know what's going on. So we help that person, first of all, understand their disability. So we can provide some services to help them understand this is what schizophrenia looks like. This is how it impacts your ability to get employment. And here are some counseling sessions we want to involve you in to help you work through those processes. And then once we help you understand your disability and the ramifications of that, then we can start walking through different VR services to help you understand your disability, how to recognize certain things, how to understand if you need medication. Those are all VR services. And then once we get you stable, then we start looking for employment. So then what happens, somebody says, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be on meds, and I don't want to talk to nobody about my disability. That's the next criteria. So you don't want the VR services. And I stop right there, because that's crucial. We have to have you stable before we start looking for employment. You can't be schizophrenic and be unstable and we send you to work. That's unethical for us. Would you want us to place somebody on a job right next door to your office who's not stable? they have a mental health crisis. Okay, so that's why you have to understand what the VR services are and want those services, whatever they may be, to get you stable. So you can't pick and choose. I just want you to find me a job, because that's not how we do that. Vocational rehabilitation services have to get you stable and whatever those impediments are before we start seeking employment. All right, so the customer would need to benefit from the services to determine their ability to obtain, retain, or advance in employment. And I have to keep saying competitive integrated employment, because a lot of people think, oh, we have special services for kids with disabilities or adults with disabilities or special jobs. We do competitive integrated employment. Somebody with a disability can get the same job with those accommodations or modifications as you or I have. Okay, here's another key factor. Eligibility for VR services does not depend on your income. Okay, does not depend on your income. Oprah Winfrey could apply for services. Okay, and then you talk about what kind of services are available. These are just a few, and I'm telling you just a few of the services that we provide. But I just want to give you an idea. There's training, there's sign language interpreters. We have orientation and mobility. People go, what is that? We call it O&M. That's helping somebody who's visually impaired or legally blind move around their home, move around their office, get to and from their job. Okay, that's transportation training, prosthetics. Okay, all of these services and many, many more. All right, next slide. So when we talk about individualized services, you saw just a few of those services, but you probably won't need everything. It's not the cafeteria thing where we just go down the line and we pick some of everything, okay? It's an individualized services. So what we do is the counselor sits down with you and determines what your disability is. We look at all the impediments to employment. What are all the things that are keeping you from getting and or keeping or advancing in that job? And whatever those things are, we're going to provide vocational rehabilitation services to address all those issues. That's why it's individualized services, because what works for one person may not work for somebody else. But we want to determine what are your impediments to employment, what vocational rehabilitation services will you need to level the playing field so that you can become employed. All right, next slide. So what is the plan? If you're eligible for vocational rehabilitation services, the next step would be to develop a plan for reaching your goal. So remember, I talked about you have a disability. That disability is an impediment to employment, which means there's some things getting in the way of you actually going to work. And then we want to come up with a list of vocational rehabilitation services that we're going to pay for to help you reach your goal. That's what the plan consists of. The plan is all those services you're going to need to help you level the playing field. That's what's in the plan. Okay, next slide. And we call that an individualized plan for employment. Okay, it's all the services that particular person, that individual is going to need to reach their employment goal. And they're agreed upon participation in the services. Because remember, I talked about it earlier. Here are the services you may need. You can't pick and choose, because we need to provide all the services you need to level the playing field so that you can become employed. So those services are in that plan for employment, are in there. We're going to pay for those services, and that person has to agree to participate in those services. Okay, so it's a conversation between the VR counselor and the individual on what that's going to look like. Right? We call that the IPE. So then working towards your IPE goal. So all those services that are going to be on that plan, your counselor is going to monitor your progress and your participation in those services. Sometimes the people that we pay to work with you on whatever thing that they're doing will send us reports monthly or whatever that time frame is. And they'll talk about how you're doing in that particular service, or if we need to change that service some kind of way, if something doesn't quite look right. Or if the individual comes back and says, that service is not really working for me. That's why we monitor the progress. And so we may have to change some things that we provided for you, some of those services. But the counselor and that individual monitors their progress and participation in those services that are on that plan. All right. Successful closure. And here's something people don't realize. We're not a forever agency. Okay. Our job is to bring somebody in who has a mental, physical, or visual disability, identify all the impediments to them getting employed or staying employed or advancing in employment, providing those services so we can help them level the playing field so that they can become employed. Once they're employed, okay, that person will need to provide their employment information to their counselor along with proof of their income. Because remember, we pay for some services through federal funding. And so once we get you employed, we need to be able to prove to the federal government, whose money we use, that you're employed. So we need to get that information from you that shows that you are competitively employed. All right, and proof of your income. Next slide. So once we get that information, the council will verify your employment. Okay, and this is a good thing. This is a hoorah moment, because we walked through all those impediments to employment. We helped level the playing field. We got you employed. We monitored your employment. And we do that for 90 days. We monitor you through that first day on the job through the 90th day on the job. And then we successfully close your job once we verify your employment and you are stable on that job and everybody's happy. You're happy, counselor's happy, employer's happy. You did it. It's called a successful closure, and we close your case successful after 90 days of stable employment. Okay. And that may look different for different people, but once you become employed, you'll provide your employment information and everything's great. Okay. I think we went back a slide. Now, sometimes people will be in that process, that plan stage at different amounts of times, because we don't know what those VR services are going to look like. Somebody may have services that may range a year, or 2 or 3. We don't know what those services look like. So everybody won't get to successful closure at the same time frame. Somebody may have counseling sessions that may last up to 6 months. Somebody else may have counseling sessions that may last up to 2 years. It's all individualized based upon your particular impediment and your plan for employment. Okay, next slide. We've got a couple slides in here that are just mandates from the federal government. I think those next two are federal funding. I talked about that a few minutes ago. We have to be a good steward of our federal funds. This is how you contact us. So this is real important. I want you to take a picture of this, and then I'm going to give you my contact information, okay? You have what we call our rapid engagement team, which is like a call center. That number is 512-936-6400. Or you can contact us at vr.office.locator@twc.state.tx.us. If you go on the Workforce Solutions website, okay, you can go into the website and you can go and look for vocational rehabilitation services, and you will also find us there. So if you've ever been to work in Texas, or you've gone to Workforce Solutions to look for a job, if you go in there, you will also find VR services, and that will walk you through some information as well. And I believe the last slide, Allison, is going to be my contact information. And if it's not, I will give it out. And then I want to open it up for questions, because I know we went through that really quick, but I want to make sure I answer your questions. This is my direct contact information. Now, I do a lot of these presentations. Matter of fact, I'll be on one in about another hour. The easiest way to reach me is by email. So if you contact me at marilyn.gilbreath@twc.state.tx.us, that's the easiest way to reach me. The other thing that I didn't talk about, and let me say this real quick, is in the midst of COVID, we are still providing services. Okay, and that will look differently based upon someone's individual need. If somebody absolutely has to have a face-to-face, we have some things set up to actually do a face-to-face if that's necessary. We have virtual services, it's very similar to what we're doing today. We have Zoom, we have Teams, we have Lifestyle. There's a different mechanism we can do. A lot of times we will talk with people via their particular technology comfort level. But no matter the situation with COVID, we are still providing vocational rehabilitation services to anybody interested in services. Okay.
Marilyn, one thing that I think is important for people to understand is the age of individuals that you can work with, because actually it's the sooner the better. Like starting younger, if you've got a child with disability, maybe they're ADHD, high functioning autism, or whatever. Talk to us about the ages that you can work with.
Very good. We start as early as age 14. We start at
Great.
14. They can actually apply for services at age 14. And where I find this really crucial, I used to be a transition VR counselor. So I used to work with the kids in high school who had physical, mental, or visual disabilities. There was a time when we didn't start working with kids until they were 18. That doesn't work. And so a few years ago, we moved it back, and I'm so excited to say we can start with kids with 14 at 14 years of age. And I find that really important, especially when we start talking about mental health issues. And I talked about schizophrenia because personally, I had, as a TVRC, that's what we call the transition VR counselors. I had a mom and dad call me. Their child was in middle school, was in 8th grade, and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And nobody knew how to handle this. Mom and dad didn't have it. The grandparents on either side didn't have it. And they were floored on what to do with this child. And so that's why I like to use that particular disability. One of the huge things that we do is we help people understand, what is schizophrenia? What is it? How is it going to change my life? How is it going to impact my life? How is it going to impact my ability to get a job? How's it going to impact my world, period? And that is the best education you can give somebody who's newly diagnosed with anything. Loss of limb, somebody who's had an accident or something. Helping them understand their disability. Once we can understand our disability, then we can move on to many other things in life. But that's a biggie right there. And so with starting with age 14, I think it's really crucial, and it's really awesome that we can do it now, because we need to help them understand that. A lot of times parents don't even get it. They're like, well, why are you starting at 14? What's the whole thing about? Remember, everything we do is geared toward what? Employment. So the 14-year-old, just like the rest of us, we had no clue what we wanted to do. So that helps the child start to look into at, hey, one day I want to go to work. Let me start practicing what that looks like. And that's what they start doing at 14. We have a lot of programs out there where they can do summer earn and learn. We have a regional transition specialist who particularly talks about that, all the services that are available to students with disabilities, but it's helping them get prepared for that transition out of high school into the world of work. So we start at age 14.
Okay, Marilyn, we have a couple of questions, and I'm going to kind of run by you. But one of the things that I want you to address, and I know that you're there because, so I like to position it this way. Texas Workforce Commission has money. They have money for this, lots of it, to help your family member, to help get them, employed, like, and build their skills. So I think
So let me
that's
stop you real quick,
exciting.
Allison. Let me stop you real
Sure.
quick, because I don't want people to get confused. I don't want you to walk into the Workforce Solutions office and say you all have money. It's a department under Workforce Solutions. You want to walk into the Vocational Rehabilitation Services area. That's separate department.
Different.
So when you walk into Workforce Solutions, they have other things going on. They have summer programs for youth. If your child has a disability, you need to be asking for Vocational Rehabilitation Services.
VR.
Sorry about that, Allison, because people do
No, absolutely. I think that that's a good clarification. But I think, here's what I want you to address, and then I'm going to go to the questions. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we hear working with special needs families all the time is that there was a disconnect once COVID happened. Some people said there was a disconnect prior to COVID. They've struggled to get in contact with their counselor. They've struggled to have return calls. So if we have families that are on here today that is an issue for, how do they fix that? Do they call you? Do they email you? Or can you provide a recommendation for that?
Any of those numbers I just gave you. I would prefer, if you're in Region 5, which is Gulf Coast, you call me, because I can go right to the counselor. I can go right to the VR manager or the VR supervisor.
So basically Houston or greater Houston area, if you're in that area and you're, having some of those issues, then just reach out to Marilyn herself. Okay, so one question we have, what what happens if the individual has a problem 90 days on the job? So maybe they get fired or they're about to get fired or something happens. So we kind of take them through this training, they get a job, and then calamity happens. Then what
It
happens?
happens a lot, unfortunately. That's why you'll see that I said the counselor and the individual stay in connection with each other so we can identify that that's happening. So it's not on the 90th day that it happens. We know all along something's not going right with this program. Something's not going right with this job. And the counselor can step in. And it may be that that wasn't a good job fit. So maybe we need to back up and look for another type of job. But that's the whole reason that the counselor and the individual rock and roll along with each other that whole 90 days, because we want to identify things as soon as possible. And sometimes it's not a good job fit. And sometimes we have to go back and look at other employment. Absolutely. Good question.
Okay. And then here's another good question. They're all good. What about somebody that has their child on the interest list in Texas? Does that affect their eligibility for this program? Would they need to come off of that list? Or if they come up for services such as like Texas Home Living or Class or HCS or what? Tell me about that.
Okay. We're about employment. Those other programs do something entirely different. So where you live or who's providing you health insurance or all that has nothing to do with you going to work. Now, if you decide that you want SSI and you don't want to go to work, that's the only caveat that we're concerned with under VR. But all those other services you're getting, the earlier you're on them, the better, because we're dealing with the employment side of the house.
But I'd like you to clarify that. So right now, SSI is $7.94 a month. If you're not charging rent or room and board, it's five something. So even if you're on SSI, that doesn't prevent a person from working with you guys and going to work, but their SSI would be reduced, is basically what you're saying. So if
And we have somebody that will specifically talk about that. So let's say that you have a child who's getting Social Security and you heard that amount. Is that going to be enough money for them to have a gainful lifestyle? If you determine no, and that child also says, yes, I want to go to work, I want competitive integrated employment, that's something that the council will work with, because then we'll have somebody else come in from the SSI side of the house and say, here's how much money you can make for whatever period of time before your money is dropped. So that's
yes.
part of that individualized plan for employment.
And
If
that
you're on
and
Social Security,
also you can work and keep Medicaid, and there's levels, amounts of income that you can make and still maintain Medicaid, even though your SSI might be reduced. So that's good. And just for people that are dependent on the Medicaid for the health insurance side of the house, there is a way to still work and still get that. Okay. So what happens if we have an individual that is in the program and they quit in the middle of it? Can they come back later?
what's the reasoning that they quit? Did they not want the VR services?
Well, let's say that I know that I've had a lot of families that quit specifically because of COVID, because they had their child had a compromised immune system and it wasn't safe for them to work anymore, so they couldn't be pursuing work because of COVID. But let's say, for instance, the individual didn't want VR services at that time.
So let me answer both. If your child lost their job because of COVID, they didn't quit. So they're still in our services and we can still help them, because one of the things we're doing is reaching out to people with disabilities who have lost their job because of COVID. So if they lost their job because of COVID, they have not lost services in VR and they have not been closed because they have not met that 90-day successful employment. So they're still there. They need to get in touch with their counselor and move forward with VR services. Second part of that is if you come in and you say you've done services and we've paid for certain things and you just said, I don't want it anymore. It depends on what you got. And I know that sounds real ominous, but let me just say it this way. If you got supported employment, and that's a service that requires the person to have a lot more help getting employed, that's a service that you're not going to get more than 1 or 2 times. So be mindful. Okay. So all I say, be mindful. There are some services that you can only, because remember, we're doing federal funds. So we have to be a good steward of the federal funds. So before you quit VR services, I would encourage everybody to do your level best to walk through all the process and procedures and say, let me try to fix this. Why are you quitting the services? If you're not wanting to go to work, that's an entirely different thing. Okay, if you're not wanting to go to work, but I would like for you to make that decision early on before you tap into federal dollars, because we all want to be a good steward of federal dollars.
Okay, so there is a message on here about that VR counselors, that we consistently have a hard time connecting with VR counselors. They're often understaffed. What can consumers do to support this? Like, we're parents, we're here, we're advocates for our loved ones. What can we do more effectively to connect more effectively? I mean, we've got your number, we've got that. So, but you're one person. So if there's a whole bunch of us and we're all calling at once, what else can we do?
If you know who your counselor is, contact your counselor. If you know who your counselor supervisor is, contact your counselor supervisor. Okay,
Okay.
just ask for the chain of command.
Okay. Someone says, we've done this entire process for my brother and still no one has come through. What is going to change, or what do we do? If you've gone through the intake and you've kind of gone through this process, and then what do we do?
I don't know the particular case, but that person has my email address. If you will
Okay.
have your child or your son or your brother contact me directly, and it's them, I can open up their case and I can tell you exactly what's going on.
Okay, and I think that you answered this, but once they complete the program, so they've done their training, that you guys have assessed and all that stuff, and they had a job and then they lost their job. So that was the question before, where you said they're
So,
connected to the counselor.
so actually, there's a caveat to that. So
Okay.
if you lost your job because of your disability, then we can help you again. If you lost your job because you stole some money, had nothing to do with your disability, or you had an altercation on the job that had nothing to do with your disability, that's entirely different. If you lose your job because of your disability, then yes. So we have a lot of people that'll be on a job 1 or 2 years and they're rock and roll and they're doing great. And then they say, I don't want to work no more. And they quit their job. That's not a reason to come back to VR.
But what about a person, so as a result of their disability of high functioning autism or ADHD or what have you, they make impulsive decisions and sometimes they say things that they shouldn't. Is that losing a job as a result of your disability, or is that
Exactly.
okay?
Yes.
Good.
Exactly.
Okay. Just checking, because that
Yes.
happens a lot. Okay. Uh,
Exactly.
Okay, so we have another question. Is there a proper way to get VR connected with my child's private school? I understand that VR is connected to the public school. So I'd like you to answer that question, Marilyn. And then I would also like you to tell the families that if their children are in the public school, how that connection works.
Okay. So there's a couple of things. If your child is in private school, you need to ask the private school to reach out to us. That school, you need to ask that private school to please reach out to Vocational Rehabilitation Services. And most likely they're going to reach out to our regional transition specialist, which is Kristen Davis, because I'm sure there's more than one child in that private school that needs our services. Same thing with public schools. If your child attends a school, high school, the first thing you want to ask is, you want to talk to the diagnostician at the school, you want to talk to the special ed coordinator, you want to talk to the 504 coordinator, even the assistant principal, school counselors, and say, hey, is there a vocational rehabilitation person assigned to this school? Because 7 out of 10 times there are, the parent just doesn't know about it. So you want to ask the people at the school, is there somebody assigned to this school? And if they tell you yes, then they'll give you that person's contact information and you can work with them directly. If they tell you no, then you can say, can you reach out to VR and have them come to this school?
I have a
Or
question.
if you don't want the school, because some parents don't want the school to be in the middle of what their child's disability is, then call me.
Okay.
And I can do an initial contact on your child, and I'll get them connected to a counselor. It won't necessarily be a transition counselor, but I'll get them connected to a counselor that's in their zip code.
Okay, that was my question, is like, why, if we can contact you guys directly, why do we need to get the school involved, or why should we get the school involved?
Because if you're a transition VR counselor, you actually go to the school. You meet the kids at the school.
Okay.
And so the school needs to know why you're coming into their building. That's why they need to know. A regular vocational rehabilitation counselor doesn't have the ability to go into the school every week like a transition counselor does. So that student's probably only going to see that counselor maybe once or twice a semester. And the other times they'll have to go into the office. So there's a difference. There's a transition VR counselor that's in the school all the time. with the difference in COVID, obviously, but they come to school every week. They're assigned certain schools. A regular VR counselor comes in at the discretion of their caseload because they work with adults and what they've agreed upon with that particular school. So that's why you want the school involved from that standpoint. But if your child is going straight to the counselor and you don't want the school involved, that's okay too.
Okay, we have some people that are not in the Houston area that are on this meeting today. So if they need to find out who their person is for their region, where can they find that? Is there?
Go back a slide to the one where it says VR near me.
Let's see if I can get back here. Are you guys seeing that?
It says vr.office.locator@twc.state.tx.us.
Okay,
and that will
perfect.
connect you to the office closest to where you live.
Okay, perfect. All right, and let's see. Got lots of questions, lots of good questions. I see one that says, someone said to everyone that they can also contact their student hireability navigator as
That's
we are.
under Workforce Solutions.
Okay, so that's different than the vocational rehab that we're talking about right now.
But the student hireability navigators will refer them to us.
Okay. I'm seeing that most people have trouble after a year or when the supervisor changes. That is something that we do hear of kind of turnover of the staff, and it's been maybe a lot worse since COVID. So how is that going, and have they addressed that?
That's something I can't answer because I don't know. I'm not in that loop, so to speak. But if your child or you have been working with a counselor and you've established a relationship or you've been working with that counselor, the counselor should notify you when they're going to be leaving or when they're taking another job. All that should be in a conversation you're having with your counselor. Now, let's just say one day you call in following up with your counselor and they're no longer there. Then you need to ask for the supervisor, ask for the VR manager. Okay, go through those processes because somebody should be letting you know that the caseload is vacant. You got a new counselor. If they don't, then you do your due diligence or contact me.
Okay. All right. So then the question again, and this may have been answered, but I just want to make sure that we're addressing it, is can someone re-enter VR services multiple times? And so if we just talk about that, if they had services, they worked, they got a job, they left, their case was closed, how many times can they come back for VR services if the services are
So
needed?
if your case has been closed unsuccessful several times, then the manager has to approve you being reopened. If your case has been closed unsuccessful several times, and I'm being ambiguous because it depends on what's going on. If that person's come in and gotten a bunch of services that led to employment, they just walk away, into la la land, that it's an individualized situation to sit and look at. What are the reasons for them, going back and forth? Because remember, federal dollars, federal and state taxpayer dollars. So something was disconnected somewhere, because I don't understand why you would have to do that many times. If in fact your impediments to employment were addressed and you were successfully employed, why you would be an unsuccessful closure. But unsuccessful closures get looked at.
Okay, so for a family that is in public school and they've asked for an invitation for the VR counselor to their IEP and they've never shown up ever, do VR counselors go to an IEP?
When they can. Remember, IEPs happen all the time. There's thousands of them a day across the state, and we only have a couple hundred counselors.
Okay.
And so the key to that is getting connected before the IEP. Okay, because when we walk into an IEP, we don't know your student. We don't know what's going on. So what's the reason for us being there is what at that point.
Okay.
So you want to have a relationship and a connection beforehand, if at all possible. Good questions, guys. I love it.
Yeah, there's so many good questions. I'm loving this too. Dr. James Williams from Bloom Consulting says that he's worked with you in the past with their customers, and that you're wonderful and amazing, knowledgeable, and resource to everyone. So yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Okay, we're in League City, Galveston County. We get the runaround from our local office near us. Can we work with you?
You can call me and I'll get you connected to the right person.
Okay, that is perfect. Okay, so one thing, I think we've got to the bulk of the questions. I think we've answered everything. One
Oh,
thing
I
that
see a good one. I see a real good one, Allison.
where
Let me
is it?
address this one. What happens if a child
Oh,
does
I
not
see it.
have a diagnosis? You have to have a diagnosis. You just can't say, hey, my child is bad. I think there's something wrong with it. Because remember, this is federal and state dollars. If you think there's something wrong with your child, then you have to do the due diligence on your own to determine what that diagnosis is. We can't go out and look for a disability. We can't spend money to determine what does your child or what does this adult have. Even with adults, you have to come in with a diagnosis. And I'm going to step out on a limb here, talk to your school because they have counselors and they have diagnosticians to help you identify that.
And I see Texas Workforce has youth services in all offices, WIOA for youth. So, but that's not your department. So but that may be something that you guys can look up and kind of see on the internet. And as far as the diagnosis and the testing, and I mean, there's a lot of resources out there, and a lot of agencies, a lot of companies that actually do accept insurance and other things like that. So if you're needing help with the diagnosis, then we can certainly make some referrals for that. One thing that I want you to address before we'll probably close up a little bit early. One thing that we hear over and over, Marilyn, is that when you request vocational rehab services, you have to say the perfect thing, because if you don't say it right, you don't request correctly, you don't speak what you're asking for, then you're not going to get services. That's kind of that's the word. And that's like, we've heard this a lot from other families that have tried to engage VR over the years. So tell us what it is that we're supposed to say when we do have children with a diagnosis, with a disability that needs help. What is it that we're supposed to say when we call or when we email?
Okay. My child has a disability and my child wants to go to work. Because everything we do is about competitive integrated employment. And when I was a transition VR counselor, I can tell you, sometimes the parent wants the child to go to work and the child does not. And so when the child starts being involved in services and they don't want to be there, mom and dad, not a good situation, because they're not going to get what they need out of that particular resource or out of that particular service. And so the student has to be able to say, I want vocational rehabilitation services to help me get a job after high school. And sometimes that's worded differently, depending on the child's disability. I've had kids who are IDD, and their thing is, I want to have my own apartment. Great. How do you get your own apartment? You have to have a paycheck. So let's talk about what that looks like. So there's different ways to get to that, because all kids don't understand competitive integrated employment, but the bottom line is, my child has a mental, physical, or visual disability, and my child is interested in having employment and going to work after high school or even during high school, because we want to practice what work looks like. That's part of that transition. And so a lot of times people come in and say, hey, I know you help pay for kids to go to college. Okay. That's going to be a buzzword that's going to send red flags. Okay, because everything that we do leading to employment doesn't always require college. So you want to talk about, my student, or the student says, I have a disability, but I want to go to work. And these are the things I think are getting in the way, or I'm not sure what's going to get in the way, but this is my disability. Can you help me?
And for people that have already done extensive testing with their children, they've done neuropsych testing, they have IQ testing, they have things that have been done through maybe the Harris Center or Texana or things like that. Are those tests and things, is that something that you guys also evaluate? Do you guys do your own types of vocational testing to see what they need?
So that's part of the eligibility process, is getting all those medical records, because remember, you have to have a diagnosis. And so we want to see what that looks like. So all those medical records you have, please provide them to the counselor, because that will help the counselor determine eligibility. And the counselor and the student and yourself as a parent will make the determination of what else is needed, if anything.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. All right. Do we have any additional questions? I'm just looking at the chat box. You can put them in there real quick if you have any additional. This is really good. I'm sad that we haven't done this before, and we are going to do this as frequent as possible because so many of the families that we work with, I mean, they're just in this exact, in this exact boat, and they need help and services, and the kids want to go to work. They want, they want them to go to work. So it's exciting to know that these services are available and to know how to get them and actually not be confused by the Texas Workforce Commission versus VR and like the different, it's very siloed. All these government entities are
Yes.
siloed and who does what for everyone. So thank you for that. Let's see. Oh, it says, thank you, Maryland. Special Olympics, Texas needs people like you for support. So there we have that. Thank you, Tina. All right. So, Marilyn, we thank you for being here today. This just is a quick slide. You might want to take a picture of it or just kind of jot these down really quick. As a special needs planning firm, we do educational events monthly, usually weekly. But the bullet points that you see on the screen now, these are things as a special needs parent, if you serve special needs and you're helping families get organized on what they need to be doing for the future of their loved one. These are some things that need to be on your radar. Okay, special needs planning can be a pretty daunting task. On top of our full-time jobs and our marriages and other kids and everything else that we have going on. But these are just some things that should be on your list. Of the things that you're going to be working towards as it relates to developing a plan for your child. We do have a YouTube channel. We have a lot of discussions on this. Like I said, we have webinars weekly on these topics. So if you need to get educated on that, you can visit, attend one of those Zoom meetings or visit our YouTube channel on this. But just put these things on your radar. There's so many things. You want to develop a comprehensive special needs care plan. If your child is going to need care for the rest of their life, the sooner you get going on that, the more likely you're going to reach your goal as far as the plan. SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, and Medicare. Oh my gosh, we could have a whole day discussion on that. It's confusing for so many people. So are so many of these topics. Special needs trust, ABLE accounts. That's where you can have money above and beyond what SSI says you can have and not lose SSI. So we'll talk about that. And then, of course, many of you, guardianship is on the horizon. We don't need guardianship prior to the child turning 18. Some of us don't need guardianship at all. But you can start the guardianship process for your child that does need guardianship 6 months prior to them turning 18. So if you're in that zone, you might be thinking about starting that process 6 months prior. We can apply for SSI the month that the child turns 18, their eligibility magically switches from your household assets to theirs. So even though your child may have never qualified for SSI before, when they turn 18, they usually do because it's based off of their assets. And so then there's just so many other things on this list, and we won't spend too much time going over those, but we just definitely want to make sure that you have those on your radar. Let's see, I want to see if we have any other questions. Okay, our Miss Jones put a link in there for the job seekers vocational rehab youth and students. She put that link in there, and then okay, and then we have a question about contacting directly, and for sure. So I'm going to put our contact information up on the screen, and should you want to have a personalized consultation as it relates to special needs planning, we're happy to help you with that, and that is how you reach us. Today's meeting has been recorded, and you will, again, you'll get an email with Marilyn's contact information, our contact information, and the recording of today's meeting. So let's see. All right. Having said that, I think we've got all of our questions answered. Marilyn, it was a pleasure having you with us today. You've cleared up a lot. This was so good, and I really thank you for taking the time to be with us, and we look forward to having additional meetings with you in the future.
You guys are absolutely welcome. I thank you for all the wonderful comments and questions. This is how we get through the process. I feel very passionate about VR services. As I said, that we're the best kept secret. Sometimes it may be a little daunting getting to us, but please reach out to me and help me help you. Take care, everybody. Be safe out there.
Thanks so much. Have a good one, guys.